Hello friends, welcome to Book Dark Reader. Today we are going to talk about Act as if you are the best, no one is better than you, by Napoleon Hill. This book exposes and addresses the quiet inner permission we keep giving ourselves to live smaller than our potential. Let me be honest with you from the start. This is not one of those books that gently pats your back and tells you everything will be fine. It looks at you calmly, almost coldly, and asks a question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Why do you keep acting like someone else deserves more confidence than you? Not more skill, not more experience, more confidence. And before you rush to answer, pause, because the way you live already answered it for you. The core idea sounds simple, almost childish at first. Act as if you are the best, not someday, not after approval, now. And this is exactly why people dismiss it too quickly. They hear arrogance, they hear ego, they hear pretending. But that's not what the author is pointing at. He is pointing at something far more uncomfortable. Your behavior already acts as if something is true. Every hesitation, every apology for existing, every time you shrink your opinion before speaking, you are already acting, just not in your favor. Now you might be thinking, but I don't want to be fake. This is where most people fail. They confuse acting with lying. Hill is not asking you to lie about your abilities. He is asking you to stop lying about your worth. There is a massive difference. Skill grows with time, worth does not. And the tragedy is that most people wait to feel worthy before they behave confidently, while confidence only comes after behavior changes. This loop keeps them stuck for decades. Here's a line from Hill that sounds harmless until you sit with it. Your only limitation is the one you set up in your own mind. Read that again slowly. This is dangerous because it removes your favorite excuse. If this is true, then your boss, your past, your parents, your circumstances are no longer the main barriers. Your internal permission system is. And if you ignore this, nothing external changing will ever be enough. This is where people stop reading. Because responsibility feels heavier than failure. Failure lets you blame. Responsibility forces you to choose. Hill talks repeatedly about the idea that belief is not a feeling. It is a decision expressed through action. You don't wake up believing you are capable. You wake up and act like someone who believes, and the belief follows to avoid internal conflict. The human mind hates contradiction. If you consistently behave like someone who trusts themselves, your mind eventually aligns to protect its own logic. But if you wait for motivation, you are waiting for permission that never arrives. Think about how you walk into rooms, how you speak when you disagree, how quickly you explain yourself. This is not random personality. This is rehearsed identity. You practiced it without realizing. And the book quietly asks, if you practiced shrinking, why can't you practice expansion? Let me collide this idea with real life for a moment. You've seen people who are not the smartest, not the most talented, yet they move as if they belong anywhere they enter. And doors open, opportunities follow, people listen. This is not luck. This is not charisma. This is behavioral certainty. And every time you say, that's just how they are, you protect yourself from admitting you could choose differently. Be honest with yourself. You've waited, haven't you? You've told yourself, once I know more, once I fix this, once I'm ready. This line might make you uncomfortable, but readiness is often just fear dressed in logic. Hill argues that action creates readiness, not the other way around. And acting as if you are the best does not mean claiming superiority. It means refusing to enter situations already defeated. This is where a mental stake is driven into the ground. If you don't change how you show up before results arrive, results may never arrive at all, because the world responds to signals. And uncertainty signals are interpreted as low value, even when the person behind them is capable. There's a subtle correction Hill makes that most readers miss. Acting as if you are the best is not loud. It's not aggressive. It's quiet consistency. It's making decisions without begging for reassurance. It's standing by your choices without over-explaining. It's correcting mistakes without self-flagellation. That calm posture tells the world, and more importantly tells your own mind, that you trust yourself to handle outcomes. You won't enjoy hearing this, but insecurity is often selfish. It keeps attention locked inward. How am I being seen? Did I sound stupid? What if I fail? Confidence, and yet resistance appears right here. The fear of being exposed. The fear that if you act confidently, someone will test you and prove you wrong. Hill doesn't deny this risk. He embraces it. Because even being corrected while standing tall grows you faster than hiding perfectly. This is no longer a concept. This is you. You've avoided opportunities not because you weren't ready, but because you didn't want to be seen trying. You've chosen safety over self-respect. And the book gently but firmly suggests that the longer you wait, the more painful this avoidance becomes. A small win happens when you act once despite the discomfort. Speak once. Decide once. Hold eye contact once. And something shifts. Not outside. Inside. You realize the world didn't end. But now a deeper question forms, one that doesn't let you rest. If acting small has been a habit, and habits can be changed, what happens to your life if you stop giving yourself permission to stay invisible? And if you stayed with this, it means something in you already felt exposed. That's good. That discomfort is not resistance, it's recognition. Now let's go deeper, because this is where pretending ends and patterns begin. One of the most unsettling ideas in this book is that most people are not limited by lack of ability, but by loyalty to an old self-image. You don't fail because you can't do better. You fail because doing better would require you to stop being the person you've learned how to survive as. That version of you, the cautious one, the agreeable one, the one who doesn't make waves, has kept you safe. And safety can feel like success when you've been afraid long enough. Napoleon Hill makes it clear, though he never says it softly. The mind accepts whatever identity you repeatedly demonstrate. Not what you wish for. Not what you affirm once in the mirror. What you consistently live out. If you repeatedly act unsure, your mind concludes, I must be unsure. If you repeatedly hesitate before speaking, your mind decides, my thoughts must be dangerous. And once that belief settles, it begins to defend itself. This is where most people misunderstand fear. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is the guard dog protecting your current identity. When you try to act as if you are the best, fear appears not because you are wrong, but because you are threatening an old contract. A contract that says, I will not embarrass myself, and in return I will not grow. Let me be honest with you. You don't fear failure as much as you fear losing the excuse. Because if you act confidently and still struggle, then you can no longer say, I never tried. That's a heavier truth to carry. Hill introduces a quiet but brutal insight here. People do not rise to the level of their goals. They fall to the level of their self-concept. You can dream big, plan perfectly, and still sabotage yourself if your internal image says, people like me don't win. This is not conscious. This is automatic. And that's why willpower alone never fixes it. There's a short line that hits harder the longer you sit with it. What the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Most people hear this and think about imagination. That's not the danger. The danger is the word believe. Because belief is not something you say. It's something your nervous system trusts. And your nervous system trusts repetition, not hope. Now you might be thinking, so what am I supposed to do? Just fake confidence? This is where clarity matters. Acting as if you are the best is not about pretending you know things you don't. It's about behaving as if you are capable of learning, correcting, and adapting without collapsing. The confidence is not in perfection. It's in resilience. Think about how you react to mistakes. Do you explain yourself immediately? Do you apologize excessively? Do you retreat emotionally? These are not manners. These are signals. Signals that say, I am not safe unless I am approved. And the world reads those signals clearly, even when you think you're hiding them. This is not just a story, this is your habit. You soften your voice at the end of sentences. You add unnecessary disclaimers. You ask for permission to exist. And every time you do, your mind notes it down as evidence. Here's where people get uncomfortable. Acting as if you are the best means tolerating temporary rejection. It means letting people misunderstand you without rushing to correct the image. It means standing still while your old instincts scream, fix this now. Most people would rather be liked than respected, even if it costs them their future. This is where people stop growing. Because growth demands friction. And friction feels like danger to a nervous system trained for approval. Hill doesn't encourage reckless behavior. He encourages deliberate posture. He suggests that your internal dialogue should change before your circumstances do. Instead of asking, what if I fail, ask, what if I handle it? That shift seems small. It isn't. One question weakens you. The other trains you. Be honest with yourself. When was the last time you acted decisively without checking how it would be received? When was the last time you chose self-respect over comfort? If you can't remember, that's not an accident. That's conditioning. A small correction happens when you pause before shrinking. When you let silence exist without filling it. When you allow someone else's discomfort to stay theirs. And again, the world doesn't collapse. But something else happens. Your mind begins to update its records. You feel resistance here. Of course you do. Because if this is true, then waiting has been a choice, not a sentence. And that realization can either free you or crush you. If your identity has been shaped by fear-driven behavior, what happens when you start acting from self-trust instead? And who might you lose when you do? If you are still here, then you've already crossed a quiet line. Because once you realize that your behavior shapes your identity, you can't unsee it. And now something more uncomfortable begins to surface: the cost. Napoleon Hill doesn't frame this gently. He makes it painfully clear that every version of you has a price. Acting small has kept you comfortable, but it has also been expensive. Not in obvious ways, in slow, invisible ways, in opportunities you didn't pursue, in conversations you softened until they meant nothing, in decisions you delayed until someone else made them for you. This is the part where people start bargaining with themselves. I'll act confident when the timing is right. I'll step up when I'm more prepared. This is where most people fail, because the timing never becomes right for someone who is waiting for certainty. Certainty is the reward for action, not the prerequisite. Hill's philosophy cuts straight through this illusion. He argues that hesitation is not a lack of information. It is a lack of self-trust. And self-trust is not built by thinking. It is built by choosing, then surviving the consequences, good or bad. Your mind doesn't need perfect outcomes. It needs proof that you can handle imperfect ones. Here's a dangerous realization. The longer you delay acting as if you are the best, the more evidence your mind collects that you are not. Time becomes a witness against you, and one day you wake up not lacking confidence, but convinced you don't deserve it. Let me be honest with you. You already know what decisive action feels like. You've felt it in small moments. When you said no without explaining. When you trusted your instinct once and it worked. But instead of building on that, you minimized it. You told yourself it was luck. That dismissal matters more than you think. Hill emphasizes that success is not an event. It is a direction. Acting as if you are the best means aligning your daily posture with where you are going, not where you've been. Most people do the opposite. They let their past define their posture, then wonder why their future looks the same. This is where a false belief must be broken. Confidence is not loud. It does not rush. It does not beg to be understood. It moves at its own pace. And that calmness threatens insecure systems. Which is why when you begin to act differently, people may react strangely. This is not just a story. This is your habit. You have learned to keep others comfortable, even when it costs you clarity. You've chosen harmony over honesty. And the moment you stop doing that, resistance appears. Sometimes subtle, sometimes sharp. Hill warns about this without dramatizing it. When you change your internal standard, your external relationships are forced to adjust. Some will, some won't. And this is where fear tightens its grip, because acting as if you are the best may cost you approval. And approval has been your emotional currency. You won't enjoy hearing this, but some people benefit from you doubting yourself. It keeps the hierarchy intact. When you stop shrinking, you disrupt unspoken agreements. And not everyone will clap for that. Now you might be thinking, so I'm supposed to become cold? No, you are supposed to become anchored. There's a difference. Anchored people can be kind without being weak, clear without being cruel, silent without being passive. Hill's idea of self-confidence is rooted in responsibility. When you act as if you are the best, you also accept accountability for your actions. You don't hide behind excuses. You don't blame conditions. And that level of ownership is rare, which is why it stands out. Notice how often you mentally rehearse failure before action. That rehearsal trains your nervous system to expect collapse. Acting as if you are the best flips the rehearsal. You don't deny risk. You assume competence. I'll deal with it. That sentence alone changes how your body responds. This is where people stop reading. Because this requires discipline, not inspiration. It requires you to notice when you are about to retreat and choose differently. Again and again, without applause. A small win happens when you hold your ground once. When you don't overcorrect. When you let your words land and don't chase validation. And the silence that follows doesn't destroy you. It strengthens you. But resistance doesn't disappear. It adapts. It becomes more convincing. It whispers, don't change too much. You lose people. And here's the uncomfortable truth Hill leaves you with. If your confidence threatens the balance, something subtle has shifted by now, whether you admit it or not. You're no longer just hearing ideas. You're recognizing patterns. And recognition is dangerous, because once you see the pattern, continuing it becomes a conscious choice. Napoleon Hill moves into territory here that most self-help books avoid because it makes readers uncomfortable. He suggests that many people are not afraid of failure, but of separation. Acting as if you are the best often means stepping out of familiar emotional roles. The listener, the supporter, the one who waits. And when you stop playing those roles, people don't always know where to place you anymore. This is where internal conflict sharpens. You want growth, but you also want belonging. And Hill does not pretend this tension disappears. He insists you must decide which one you are willing to sacrifice temporarily, because trying to protect both usually costs you yourself. Let me be honest with you. You've learned how to read rooms. You sense when to pull back, when to soften, when to disappear a little so things stay smooth. This skill once kept you safe, but now it keeps you small. And the book quietly asks whether you are willing to outgrow the version of you that survived, in order to become the version that leads. There's a dangerous line hidden in Hill's philosophy. It's not flashy, but it cuts deep. The person who believes he can, and the person who believes he can't, are both usually right. This is dangerous because it means your belief doesn't just influence outcomes. It selects them. And if you ignore this, you will keep proving yourself right in the worst ways. Now you might be thinking, but I don't want to dominate or overpower others. This is another false belief that needs to be broken. Confidence is not dominance. It is self-alignment. It is behaving in a way that does not require permission. You don't push others down. You stop pulling yourself down. This is not just a story, this is your habit. You wait for cues. You look for signals that it's okay to speak. You delay decisions so someone else can take responsibility. And every time you do, you reinforce the idea that authority exists outside you. Hill introduces a powerful correction here. Authority is not assigned. It is assumed. Not arrogantly. Consistently. The moment you begin to act from your own judgment, people recalibrate. Some resist. Some respect. But none are confused. You won't enjoy hearing this, but clarity can feel threatening to people who rely on ambiguity. When you become clear, you force others to confront their own indecision. And not everyone is ready for that mirror. This is where resistance becomes social. You may be labeled, changed, different, too much. These labels are rarely about you. They are about the discomfort your growth creates in others. Hill warns that if you retreat at this stage, the internal damage is worse than before, because now you know what you're avoiding. Be honest with yourself. How often have you adjusted your truth to maintain peace? How many times have you said yes when you meant no? Acting as if you are the best means accepting that some peace is false, and some conflict is necessary. A small correction happens when you let a disagreement stand without smoothing it over. When you trust that honesty will not destroy connection, only reshape it. And sometimes, reshape means release. This is where people stop growing, because loss feels immediate, while growth feels abstract. Hill challenges this by reframing loss. What you lose is not people, it is dependency. And dependency is not love. The emotional impact hits quietly here. You realize that some of your exhaustion comes from maintaining versions of yourself that no longer fit. Acting as if you are the best is not about adding confidence. It is about removing self-betrayal. But don't romanticize this stage. It is awkward. You will misjudge. You will overcorrect. You will feel exposed. That's part of recalibration. Hill doesn't promise elegance. He promises alignment. And now the unease deepens. Because once you begin acting from self-trust, you can no longer unfeel when you betray it. And that, by now, something important has happened. You're no longer asking whether this idea makes sense. You're asking whether you're willing to live with the consequences of it. And that shift matters, because this is where theory turns into confrontation. Napoleon Hill moves into a quieter, more ruthless truth here. Acting as if you are the best does not instantly make life easier. In many ways, it makes it harder at first, because you lose the cover of invisibility. When you act with self-trust, your actions are seen, judged, responded to, and that exposure is exactly what the old version of you was trying to avoid. Let me be honest with you. There is comfort in being underestimated. When expectations are low, mistakes feel harmless. But when you raise your own internal standard, you feel every misstep more sharply. Hill doesn't sugarcoat this. He suggests that feeling this pressure is a sign you are finally taking yourself seriously. This is where most people retreat, not because they can't handle failure, but because they can't handle being witnessed. Acting as if you are the best means allowing others to form opinions without controlling them. And if your confidence has always been tied to approval, this feels like free fall. Hill introduces a subtle but powerful distinction here. Confidence is not the absence of doubt. It is the refusal to let doubt dictate behavior. Doubt can exist. Fear can exist. They just don't get the final say. Most people wait for doubt to disappear before acting. Confident people act and let doubt come along for the ride. This is not just a concept, this is your habit. You've delayed action until you felt emotionally ready. You've mistaken emotional comfort for alignment. And the book confronts you with an uncomfortable mirror. Growth often feels wrong before it feels right. You won't enjoy hearing this, but discomfort is not always a warning. Sometimes it's a signal that you're leaving a familiar cage. Hill warns that the mind will produce convincing arguments to pull you back. Logical ones. Responsible ones. Now is not the time. You could lose this. People might judge you. And the mind is correct. You might. but avoiding those risks has already cost you something. Be honest with yourself. How many times have you talked yourself out of action using intelligence as a shield? Acting as if you are the best means accepting that certainty is overrated. Commitment matters more. A small win happens when you choose once without rehearsing every outcome. When you say what you mean without cushioning it. When you stand by a decision even as anxiety hums in the background. And afterward, you realize something crucial. You survived. Not just the outcome, but the feeling. Hill places heavy emphasis on this internal evidence. Each time you act from self-trust, your nervous system updates its map. I can handle this. That belief is earned, not imagined. And over time, that belief compounds. This is where a false belief must be broken. You do not need external validation to legitimize your confidence. Waiting for it trains you to outsource authority. Acting as if you are the best is an internal contract. You decide that your judgment matters, even when it's imperfect. This stage often feels lonely, because you are no longer performing for reassurance. You're moving according to your own compass, and that quiet can be unsettling. Hill suggests that solitude is often the price of self-respect in a noisy world. This is where people stop reading. Because the book stops offering comfort and starts demanding integrity. You can't selectively apply this principle. Either you trust yourself, or you keep deferring to the crowd. And then resistance sharpens into something more personal. The fear that if you fully step into this posture, there will be no one left to blame. No story to hide behind. Just you and your choices. And that leads, at this point, the struggle is no longer external. It's not about people, situations, or circumstances anymore. It's internal, quiet, persistent, and far more revealing. Because now you're facing the version of yourself that has been negotiating with fear for years. Napoleon Hill presses into something here that most people avoid naming. Acting as if you are the best exposes your excuses. Not in a dramatic way. In a painfully ordinary way. You start noticing how often you delay not because you can't act, but because acting would force you to confront the outcome honestly. Success or failure, either one would end the story you've been telling yourself. Let me be honest with you. Stories are comfortable. I could have done more. I would have succeeded if things were different. These narratives protect your identity. Acting as if you are the best removes that protection. Because once you commit fully, results become feedback, not hypotheticals. And feedback doesn't negotiate. Hill argues that most people live in potential because potential feels safe. Potential has no deadlines, no proof required. But potential never builds confidence. Only execution does. And execution always risks disappointment. This is where resistance becomes clever. It doesn't say stop. It says refine. Wait a little longer. Learn one more thing. And while growth is important, Hill warns that endless preparation is often disguised avoidance. Knowledge without action becomes a hiding place. This is not just a concept, this is your habit. You research. You plan. You imagine outcomes. But when it's time to move, something tightens. That tightness is not lack of ability. It's fear of exposure. Fear of seeing yourself clearly. You won't enjoy hearing this, but acting as if you are the best means letting results define you temporarily. Not permanently, but honestly. It means allowing yourself to fail without rewriting the meaning. Failure becomes information, not identity. But you can't learn from information you never collect. Hill introduces another dangerous idea here. Confidence grows faster when you stop personalizing outcomes. When you act from commitment rather than ego, success doesn't inflate you and failure doesn't destroy you. Both become data points. Most people never experience this freedom because they never fully commit. Be honest with yourself. How often have you protected yourself, image by not trying at full intensity? Half effort gives you plausible deniability. I wasn't really trying. Acting as if you are the best removes that escape hatch. A small correction happens when you give full effort once. When you show up without holding anything back. And even if the outcome is imperfect, something shifts internally. You feel clean. Exposed, but clean. Because you didn't betray yourself. This is where emotional impact hits harder. You realize that much of your anxiety has come from living divided. One part wanting more, another part playing small. Acting as if you are the best brings those parts into alignment. And alignment is uncomfortable at first because it removes inner noise. Hill emphasizes discipline here, not motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Discipline is a decision repeated without negotiation. Acting as if you are the best means deciding who you are before circumstances decide for you. This stage can feel heavy. Because excuses fall away, you see clearly where effort was missing, where fear made choices. And self-awareness without self-compassion can become self-punishment. Hill warns against this trap. The goal is not to shame the past, but to stop repeating it. This is where people stop growing. Because self-honesty can sting, but avoiding it keeps you stuck in the same loop, just more aware of it. And now a deeper unease forms. Because once you see that your limits were partially self-imposed, you can't unknow it. You can't blame the world the same way anymore. So the question waits quiet. Something about this stage feels strangely empty, not peaceful, empty. The noise that once distracted you has quieted, and now there's space. And space forces you to notice what you've been avoiding. This is where acting as if you are the best stops being about confidence and starts being about identity. Napoleon Hill pushes into a truth that most people sense but rarely articulate. When you stop hiding behind fear, you also lose the emotional drama that came with it. Anxiety, self-doubt, overthinking, even frustration, they were familiar companions. They gave your days texture. When they fade, you are left with responsibility. And responsibility can feel flat at first. Let me be honest with you. Some people unconsciously cling to insecurity because it gives them something to react to. It gives them a reason to hesitate, a reason to complain, a reason to feel special in their struggle. Acting as if you are the best removes that narrative. There's no villain left, just choices. Hill hints at this quietly. When a person becomes self-directed, they often experience a brief loss of emotional intensity. No chaos, no urgency, just calm decision-making. And for someone used to inner turmoil, calm can feel like emptiness. This is not just a concept, this is your habit. You've lived in reaction mode, responding to pressure, to expectations, to fear. Acting as if you are the best shifts you into creation mode. You decide first, then respond. And that reversal takes time to feel natural. You might catch yourself thinking, is this it? This is where people misunderstand growth. They expect fireworks. Transformation usually arrives quietly, almost boringly. And because it doesn't feel dramatic, people assume they are doing something wrong. You won't enjoy hearing this, but peace is often mistaken for stagnation by people addicted to struggle. Hill would say that struggle is not proof of progress. Direction is. And direction doesn't always announce itself loudly. There's a dangerous temptation here, to manufacture urgency, to go back to old patterns just to feel something familiar, to overcommit, over-explain, overprove. This is where discipline matters most. Acting as if you are the best means resisting the urge to self-sabotage just to recreate emotional intensity. Be honest with yourself. How often have you confused stress with importance? How often has chaos made you feel alive? Hill challenges this attachment by suggesting that real power feels almost anticlimactic. It doesn't rush, it doesn't perform, it simply moves. A small win happens when you sit with this quiet and don't fill it. When you let decisions be simple, when you stop narrating your growth to yourself. And slowly, something deeper stabilizes. You begin to trust your own rhythm. This is where another false belief breaks. Confidence does not always feel confident. Sometimes it feels neutral, calm, unremarkable. And that neutrality is threatening to an ego that has relied on emotional highs and lows for identity. Hill emphasizes consistency here. Acting as if you are the best is not a peak state. It is a baseline. You don't rise into it. You settle into it. And settling requires patience. Now resistance returns in a subtler form. Doubt whispers, you are not pushing hard enough. You are losing your edge. But Hill would argue that what you are losing is not edge, it's noise. And noise has been disguising itself as drive for a long time. This is where people stop reading. Because there's nothing glamorous to grab onto. No rush, no crisis, just steady alignment. And that feels too simple to be powerful. But something important is happening beneath the surface. Your nervous system is recalibrating. It's learning that safety doesn't come from approval or avoidance. It comes from self-trust. And that learning takes repetition, not excitement. This stage can feel isolating, not because people leave, but because you no longer need constant emotional reinforcement. You are not seeking reassurance. You are not chasing validation. You are just moving. And that quiet confidence doesn't always invite conversation. Hill warns that many people abandon this phase because they mistake it for loss of ambition. In reality, ambition is becoming cleaner, less desperate, more focused. And then a sharper realization lands. You start to see how much of your past motivation was fueled by proving something. To someone, to yourself. Acting as if you are the best removes the need to prove. You act because it aligns, not because it impresses. That's when a new discomfort appears. If you are no longer driven by fear, approval, or urgency, what exactly is driving? If you're honest, this part feels different, heavier in a quieter way. Because now the question is no longer about confidence or fear. It's about direction. When you stop reacting and start choosing, you can no longer hide behind momentum. You have to decide what actually matters. Napoleon Hill leans into this moment with precision. Acting as if you are the best is meaningless if you don't know what you are aiming at. Confidence without direction becomes arrogance or restlessness. And restlessness is just fear wearing ambition's clothes. Let me be honest with you. Many people don't lack confidence. They lack clarity. They move, but they don't know why. They achieve things that don't satisfy them. They stay busy to avoid asking harder questions. Acting as if you are the best forces those questions forward. Hill makes a sharp point here. Purpose is not something you find. It's something you commit to. Waiting to discover purpose keeps you passive. Committing to a direction forces your identity to organize itself around action. Purpose sharpens confidence. Without it, confidence scatters. This is not just a concept, this is your habit. You've chased goals because they sounded impressive, because others valued them, because they promised security or validation. And when you reached them, something still felt off. That emptiness wasn't ingratitude. It was misalignment. You won't enjoy hearing this, but acting as if you are the best means choosing what you stand for even if it costs you options. Indecision feels flexible, but it's fragile. Commitment feels limiting, but it's grounding. Hill argues that power concentrates where attention commits. Be honest with yourself. How often have you kept multiple paths open not because they mattered, but because choosing one would mean letting others die? Acting as if you are the best means accepting that loss is part of focus. Here's a line from Hill that carries weight. A definite purpose backed by definite plans. Simple words, dangerous meaning. Because a definite purpose exposes distractions for what they are. Escapes. And if you ignore this, confidence turns into motion without meaning. This is where resistance shifts again. It no longer says, you can't. It says, you don't know enough yet. But Hill insists that clarity comes from engagement, not contemplation. Purpose refines itself through action, not before it. A small correction happens when you choose one direction and move without apology. Not aggressively, quietly. You stop explaining why this matters to you. You let it matter. And slowly, your energy aligns. You feel less scattered, less pulled apart. This is where people stop reading. Because this stage requires sacrifice. You can't chase everything and still act as if you are the best. Mastery demands exclusion. And exclusion feels risky to someone who has relied on options for safety. Hill warns that without purpose, confidence eventually collapses into ego. You start measuring yourself against others instead of against your own standard. And comparison is a sign that direction is missing. Now notice how this lands in your body. A tightening. A recognition. You felt this before. When you knew what mattered, but delayed committing because it felt too final. Acting as if you are the best removes the comfort of maybe later. This is not about grand missions. It's about internal coherence. When what you do matches what you value, confidence stabilizes. When it doesn't, no amount of bravado can hold it together. Another false belief breaks here. You don't need to be certain to commit. You need to be committed to become certain. Hill repeats this idea in different forms because it's easy to intellectually agree with and emotionally avoid. This stage often brings friction. People question your focus. They suggest alternatives. They warn you. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're projecting their own fear. Acting as if you are the best means listening without surrendering authority. The emotional impact lands slowly. You realize that clarity costs comfort. That choosing yourself means disappointing expectations. And that disappointment doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from people who love you but don't understand your direction. And yet, something steadies. You're no longer drifting. You're moving with intention. Even when unsure, you're aligned. And alignment reduces internal conflict more than certainty ever could. But a new unease appears. Because once you choose a direction, you can no longer blame confusion for lack of progress. Now effort matters. Discipline matters. Now the pressure changes shape. Earlier, fear was loud. Then it became subtle. Now it becomes quiet but heavy. Because once you know your direction, the real work begins. And this is where many people quietly drift away without admitting it. Napoleon Hill addresses this phase with an almost unsettling calm. He points out that clarity does not guarantee consistency. In fact, clarity often makes inconsistency more painful. When you don't know what you want, drifting feels normal. When you do know, every excuse feels like a betrayal. Let me be honest with you. This is where self-respect is built or destroyed in small moments no one else sees. Not in dramatic decisions. In daily follow-through. In whether you do what you said you would do after the emotion fades. Acting as if you are the best means becoming predictable to yourself. You won't enjoy hearing this, but most people don't fail because they lack discipline. They fail because they don't like the version of themselves that discipline requires. Discipline strips away mood. It removes the ability to negotiate with feelings. And if you've built your identity around emotional responsiveness, discipline feels like loss. Hill makes a sharp observation here. the strongest people are not the most intense. They are the most consistent. Intensity impresses. Consistency transforms. Acting as if you are the best means showing up even when there is no internal reward. This is not just a concept, this is your habit. You rely on motivation, on excitement, on pressure, and when those fade, you stall. Hill challenges this by reframing discipline as self-trust in motion. You don't act because you feel like it. You act because you decided. Here's a line that quietly exposes everything. Self-discipline is the ability to make yourself do what you should do, when you should do it, whether you feel like it or not. Dangerous words, because if you accept them, you lose the right to wait for readiness. Be honest with yourself. How many times have you broken promises to yourself without consequence? Acting as if you are the best means making those promises matter. Not through punishment, through identity. You stop seeing follow through as effort. You see it as who you are. A small win happens when you act once despite boredom, not fear. Boredom, that flat resistance that says, this doesn't feel urgent, and you do it anyway, and afterward, something subtle shifts. You trust yourself a little more. This is where people stop reading, because this part isn't inspiring. It's repetitive, uncelebrated, and that's exactly why it works. Hill insists that greatness is built in these quiet repetitions that never make stories. Now resistance gets clever again. It whispers, you deserve a break. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's avoidance wearing compassion. Acting as if you are the best means knowing the difference. And that discernment only comes from honesty. The emotional impact lands here when you realize how often you've abandoned momentum for comfort. How many beginnings never became habits. How many insights never became structure. Hill doesn't judge this. He exposes it. Another false belief breaks here. You don't need to push harder. You need to show up longer. Endurance beats force. And endurance is not dramatic. It's quite loyalty to your direction. This stage reshapes your relationship with time. You stop rushing. You stop procrastinating. You respect accumulation. Hill emphasizes that compound effort is invisible until it's undeniable. Acting as if you are the best means trusting that process before evidence arrives. This is where loneliness can creep in again, because discipline isolates you from people who live reactively. Your rhythm changes. Your priorities narrow. And not everyone understands why you no longer move at their pace. But something stabilizes inside you. You no longer rely on bursts. You rely on structure. And structure frees energy rather than draining it. And then a deeper discomfort appears. Because once consistency becomes possible, inconsistency becomes a choice. And choices come with responsibility. So the question that waits at the edge of this realization is, at this stage, something inside you starts resisting in a new way. Not loudly, not emotionally. It resists through logic, through reasoning, through very reasonable thoughts. And this is where the mind becomes most dangerous. Napoleon Hill understood this pattern well. He knew that once fear, doubt, and inconsistency are exposed, the mind doesn't surrender. It adapts. It becomes strategic. Acting as if you are the best now threatens not your comfort, but your self-image as a rational, intelligent person. Let me be honest with you. You start explaining your inaction in sophisticated ways. You call it balance. You call it realism. You call it being thoughtful. And sometimes those words are true, but sometimes they are camouflage. Because deep down, acting fully would force you to confront whether you truly want the life you've been imagining. Hill points out a quiet contradiction most people never resolve. They say they want growth, but they structure their lives to avoid pressure. Acting as if you are the best means voluntarily stepping into pressure before it's forced on you. And choosing pressure removes the moral high ground of complaining later. This is where people get uncomfortable. Because now there is no villain, no fear to blame, no confusion to hide behind. Just clarity and choice. And choice exposes desire. If you don't act, the question becomes not, can I, but, do I actually want this enough to change? This is not just a concept, this is your habit. You've said, someday, in ways that sounded responsible. But someday is often a polite way of saying, never under these conditions. Hill would argue that conditions are rarely perfect for those who move forward. They are created by those who do. You won't enjoy hearing this, but intelligence can become a trap. Smart people are especially good at justifying delay. They can see risks clearly. They can predict consequences. And instead of using that insight to prepare, they use it to pause indefinitely. Acting as if you are the best means refusing to let foresight become paralysis. Hill introduces another sharp idea here. The moment you truly commit, you lose the right to fantasize. Fantasies are comfortable because they cost nothing. Commitment costs energy, time, and ego. And once you commit, you must confront reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. Be honest with yourself. How much of your motivation has lived safely in your head? How often have you enjoyed imagining outcomes more than working toward them? Acting as if you are the best means choosing execution over imagination, again and again. A small win happens when you take one action that collapses fantasy into reality. When you replace "I could" with "I did." Even if the result is imperfect, something powerful happens. Your self-respect increases. Not because you succeeded, but because you stopped hiding. This is where people stop reading. Because imagination feels inspiring, while execution feels exposing. Execution reveals gaps, weaknesses, limits. And Hill insists that facing those gaps is not discouraging, it's clarifying. You finally know what needs work. Another false belief breaks here. You don't need to feel ready to commit. Readiness is a story the mind tells to stay in control. Acting as if you are the best means accepting that control is overrated. Engagement teaches faster than caution ever could. Now resistance takes a moral tone. I don't want to become obsessed. I don't want to lose myself. Hill would say that losing yourself happens faster when you drift than when you commit. Commitment gives shape. Drift dissolves it. This stage forces a hard mirror. You start to see where effort has been selective. Where you showed up only when it felt rewarding. Where you disappeared when progress became unglamorous. Acting as if you are the best means closing that gap between intention and behavior. The emotional impact lands quietly but firmly. You realize that your biggest obstacle is no longer fear, doubt, or inconsistency. It's comfort with the version of life you already know, even if that life quietly frustrates you. Hill doesn't push urgency here. He pushes honesty. You can continue as you are. Nothing will break immediately. That's the danger. Stagnation is comfortable because it rarely announces itself as failure. It feels like maintenance. But once you've seen this pattern, maintenance starts to feel like decay. You notice time passing differently. You feel impatience not with the world, but with yourself. And that impatience is not anger, it's awareness. And now the tension sharpens into a by now, the resistance doesn't feel dramatic anymore. It feels familiar, almost normal. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because when resistance becomes familiar, it stops alerting you. It just quietly shapes your days. Napoleon Hill moves into a deeply uncomfortable truth here. He suggests that many people don't consciously choose mediocrity. They slowly accept it. Through small compromises. Through repeated tolerances. Through telling themselves, this is fine, long after it stopped being true. Let me be honest with you. You don't wake up one day and decide to live beneath your capacity. You drift there. One skipped commitment at a time. One softened boundary at a time. Acting as if you are the best interrupts that drift. And that interruption feels abrasive because it exposes how long you've been coasting. This is where self-deception becomes subtle. You tell yourself you are being patient, when you are actually avoiding risk. You call it humility, when it's really hesitation. Hill doesn't attack these defenses aggressively. He simply removes their cover. He asks you to look at outcomes, not intentions. This is not just a concept, this is your habit. You evaluate yourself by what you meant to do, not by what you repeatedly do. Acting as if you are the best means letting behavior speak louder than self-image. And behavior doesn't negotiate. You won't enjoy hearing this, but comfort dulls urgency. When nothing is pushing you, you stop pushing yourself. Hill warns that comfort is not neutral. It slowly erodes ambition by making effort feel unnecessary. And once effort feels unnecessary, growth becomes optional. Optional growth rarely happens. Be honest with yourself. When was the last time you felt genuinely stretched? Not stressed. Stretched. The kind of stretch that forces you to adapt rather than endure. If it's been a while, that's not a coincidence. That's accommodation. Hill introduces a sharp contrast here. Pain with purpose strengthens. Comfort without direction weakens. Acting as if you are the best means choosing intentional discomfort over passive ease. Not constantly, but consistently. A small win happens when you deliberately choose the harder option once. Not to punish yourself, but to reintroduce friction. You take the call you've been avoiding. You start the task you've been postponing. And the discomfort you feared turns out to be tolerable. Sometimes even clarifying. This is where people stop reading. Because this stage requires maturity. No rush. No adrenaline. Just an honest assessment of habits. And habits are harder to confront than emotions. Because they reflect who you are when no one is watching. Another false belief breaks here. You don't need a crisis to change. Waiting for pain to force growth is a gamble. Acting as if you are the best means initiating change before consequences arrive. Hill points out something most people misunderstand. Pressure doesn't destroy people. Avoiding pressure does. Because when pressure finally arrives uninvited, you are untrained. Acting with self-trust beforehand builds capacity quietly. Now resistance takes a softer tone. I'm doing okay. And maybe you are. But okay is not neutral either. Okay is often the plateau before decline. Hill doesn't say this to shame you. He says it to wake you up. The emotional impact hits when you realize how much of your life has been shaped by what you tolerated rather than what you chose. Acting as if you are the best means raising your tolerance for effort and lowering your tolerance for stagnation. This stage often brings restlessness. Not the anxious kind. The honest kind. A sense that something needs to move. That staying still now feels heavier than moving forward. And that restlessness carries a question that, by now, the restlessness is no longer vague. It has a shape, a direction. And that's what makes it uncomfortable. Because when restlessness becomes specific, it stops being an emotion and starts becoming a demand. Napoleon Hill touches a nerve here that most people instinctively protect. He suggests that once awareness reaches this level, neutrality is no longer harmless. You are either moving forward deliberately, or you are actively resisting change. There is no longer an in-between. And that realization removes the comfort of ambiguity. Let me be honest with you. This is the point where many people slow down on purpose. Not because they can't continue, but because continuing would require them to change how they relate to themselves. Acting as if you are the best is no longer about effort. It's about standards. And standards expose everything. You start noticing what you tolerate. Distractions that drain you. Conversations that go nowhere. Commitments you keep out of habit, not meaning. Hill argues that self-confidence is impossible without self-respect, and self-respect collapses when your life is filled with things that don't reflect your values. This is not just a concept, this is your habit. You've said yes to things that quietly say no to you. You've stayed silent to keep things smooth. You've lowered expectations so disappointment wouldn't sting. Acting as if you are the best means reversing that pattern, not aggressively, but firmly. You won't enjoy hearing this, but clarity demands subtraction. Growth is not always about adding better habits. Sometimes it's about removing what no longer fits. And removal creates friction. Hill makes it clear that discipline is not only about action, it's about refusal. Be honest with yourself. How much of your energy is spent managing things you've outgrown? Acting as if you are the best means protecting your energy like something valuable, not something disposable. A small win happens when you draw one quiet boundary. You don't announce it. You don't justify it. You simply stop participating in what diminishes you. And at first, this feels wrong, because you're used to over-explaining. But then something steadies. You feel lighter, more aligned. This is where people stop reading. Because boundaries threaten old identities. The helpful one, the available one, the agreeable one. Hill warns that without boundaries, confidence leaks out through constant accommodation. Another false belief breaks here. You don't owe everyone access to you. Acting as if you are the best means deciding where your attention goes, rather than letting it be taken. And that decision reshapes your days more than motivation ever could. This stage often triggers guilt, especially if you've built your worth around usefulness. Hill doesn't dismiss this guilt. He reframes it. Guilt is not proof you are doing something wrong. Sometimes it's proof you are doing something new. The emotional impact lands sharply when you realize that much of your exhaustion hasn't come from doing too much, but from doing too much of what doesn't matter to you. Acting as if you are the best means aligning effort with meaning. Resistance tries one last familiar tactic here. You are becoming selfish. Hill would argue that self-respect and selfishness are not the same. Selfishness takes at the expense of others. Self-respect refuses to disappear for them. This is where internal authority solidifies. You stop asking, "Is this okay?" and start asking, "Is this aligned?" That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Your decisions become cleaner, your regret lessens. And yet, this clarity brings a new weight. Because once you see what no longer belongs in your life, keeping it becomes an active choice. And active choices carry responsibility. So the question that settles in, at this stage, something irreversible has happened. You are no longer confused about what drains you. You are no longer unsure about what aligns you. The discomfort now comes from a different place. From knowing, and still having to choose. Napoleon Hill presses into a truth that feels almost cruel in its simplicity. Awareness increases responsibility. Once you see clearly, ignorance is no longer an option. And most people don't fear failure as much as they fear the weight of conscious choice. Because conscious choice removes innocence. Let me be honest with you. It was easier when you didn't know. When you could say, I'm just figuring things out. But now you've felt alignment. You've felt the quiet strength of acting from self-trust. And every time you return to old patterns, it feels heavier than before. Not because the pattern changed, but because you did. This is not just a concept. This is your habit. You feel a pull toward what matters, and at the same time, you feel the gravity of what's familiar. Hill describes this as the final internal conflict before real transformation. The mind wants comfort. The self wants coherence. And one of them has to give. You won't enjoy hearing this, but growth eventually demands a decision that feels lonely. Not dramatic, not heroic, just lonely. Because you stop explaining yourself to people who don't understand your direction. You stop seeking permission. And that silence can feel like loss if you've relied on feedback for reassurance. Hill introduces a powerful idea here. Leadership begins internally before it ever shows externally. Acting as if you are the best means becoming your own authority. And authority without external validation can feel like standing in open space with no walls to lean on. Be honest with yourself. How often have you looked around to see if others approve before committing fully? Acting as if you are the best means committing first, and letting others adjust later. That order matters. A small win happens when you make a decision and don't announce it. You don't seek agreement. You simply act. And afterward, something settles inside you. You feel less scattered, less reactive, because you are no longer splitting your energy between intention and justification. This is where people stop reading. Because this phase removes the emotional rewards of struggle. There's no applause for internal authority. No visible marker. Just a quiet sense of rightness that only you can feel. Another false belief breaks here. You don't need consensus to move forward. Consensus is often a delay mechanism. Acting as if you are the best means trusting your judgment even when others hesitate. Hill warns that this is the stage where many people self-sabotage unconsciously. They create distractions, conflicts, drama, anything to avoid the stillness that comes with alignment. Because stillness leaves no place to hide from yourself. The emotional impact lands when you realize that the hardest part of growth is not effort, but restraint. Restraining yourself from old reactions, old explanations, old identities. Acting as if you are the best means letting the old version of you quietly retire. This can feel like grief, not for people, but for patterns, for ways you used to be. Hill doesn't rush this process. He acknowledges that identity shifts take time to integrate. But he is firm about one thing. You cannot carry the old self into the new direction without distortion. Resistance now tries its final defense. You are becoming distant. You are changing too much. And maybe you are. But Hill would argue that change is not betrayal. Staying misaligned is. You start to notice that fewer things trigger you. Fewer conversations pull you off center. Not because you care less, but because you are clearer. Acting as if you are the best simplifies your emotional landscape. And simplicity can feel unfamiliar if chaos once felt like home. This stage builds a new kind of confidence. Not loud, not visible, but stable. You no longer need to prove yourself. You are too busy living according to your own standards. And that stability doesn't fluctuate with opinion. But with stability comes another challenge. Momentum. Without fear or external pressure, you must generate forward motion from purpose alone. And purpose demands renewal. It demands that you keep choosing consciously, not automatically. And that brings the tension to a quiet but sharp edge. If you no longer need, what changes here is not what you do, but how you relate to time. Earlier, time felt like something happening to you. Now it feels like something you are responsible for. And that responsibility can feel heavy if you are not careful. Napoleon Hill approaches this phase with a kind of sober honesty. He suggests that once you stop living reactively, time becomes visible. You notice how days are spent, how weeks slip or solidify. Acting as if you are the best forces you to see time not as a resource you manage later, but as a statement of who you are right now. Let me be honest with you. Most people avoid this awareness because it's uncomfortable. It's easier to feel busy than to feel intentional. Busy gives you movement without meaning. Intention gives you meaning but demands restraint. Hill would argue that many people confuse motion with progress because progress requires choosing what not to do. This is not just a concept. This is your habit. You fill space. You say yes to small distractions. You allow interruptions to dictate rhythm, not because they matter, but because emptiness feels exposed. Acting as if you are the best means letting your time reflect your values, even when no one is watching. You won't enjoy hearing this, but how you spend ordinary days is how you spend your life. There is no separate category called someday. Hill emphasizes that greatness is not built in rare moments of inspiration, but in how consistently you protect focus from erosion. Be honest with yourself. Where does your attention leak? Not dramatically, quietly. A few minutes here, a habit there. Acting as if you are the best means treating attention like something finite, not something you can always recover later. A small win happens when you protect one block of time without justification. You don't explain it. You don't apologize for it. You simply decide that this time belongs to what matters, and the world doesn't collapse, but your sense of agency strengthens. This is where people stop reading, because this stage isn't emotional. It's practical, and practical change doesn't feel profound at first. It feels mundane, but Hill insists that mundane discipline compounds faster than dramatic effort. Another false belief breaks here. You don't need more time. You need clearer priorities. Acting as if you are the best means letting priority decide before emotion does. And emotion will protest. It always does. But emotion is not a reliable planner. This phase often reveals how much of your life was structured around reacting to others' messages, requests, expectations. Hill would say that leadership begins when you decide what deserves your first energy, not your leftover energy. The emotional impact lands when you realize how much potential has been diluted, not by failure, but by fragmentation. Acting as if you are the best means choosing depth over breadth, and depth requires saying no repeatedly, even to things that aren't bad. Resistance shows up again, but now it sounds reasonable. You are becoming too rigid. Hill would counter that boundaries are not rigidity. They are clarity, and clarity creates freedom, not limitation. This stage also asks you to confront impatience. Once you are aligned, you want results faster, and impatience can tempt you to rush or cut corners. Hill warns against this. Acting as if you are the best includes trusting the pace of what you are building. Forcing outcomes often damages foundations. You start to feel a new kind of pressure, not external, internal. The pressure to honor your own standards consistently. And that pressure doesn't come with applause. It comes with quiet accountability. This is where identity stabilizes even further. You no longer need to constantly remind yourself who you are becoming. Your schedule reflects it. Your habits reinforce it. And that consistency reduces inner conflict more than motivation ever could. But a final discomfort remains. Because now that your life is more intentional, every deviation stands out sharply. Procrastination feels louder. Distraction feels heavier. You can't pretend not to notice anymore. And that leads to the question that lingers. At the end of this journey, nothing explodes. There is no dramatic finish, no applause, no moment where the world suddenly confirms that you were right all along. And that's the point. Because acting as if you are the best was never about proving anything outwardly. It was about becoming someone who no longer needs proof. Napoleon Hill closes this philosophy in a way that feels almost unsettling in its calm. He suggests that true confidence is quiet acceptance. Acceptance of responsibility. Acceptance of consequence. Acceptance of self. When you stop asking life to validate you, life stops controlling you. Let me be honest with you. This version of you doesn't feel invincible. It feels grounded. You still experience doubt. You still feel fatigue. You still make mistakes. But none of these shake your center anymore. Because your identity is no longer built on outcomes. It's built on standards. This is not just a concept, this is your habit now. You decide, you act, you adjust. You don't dramatize failure or worship success. You keep moving. Acting as if you are the best has quietly trained you to trust your ability to respond, not your ability to predict. You won't enjoy hearing this, but most people never reach this stage because it's lonely in a very specific way. There's no audience here, no comparison, no competition, just you, living according to your own measure. And for someone who once needed feedback to feel real, this can feel strangely empty at first. Hill never promises happiness as a reward. He promises alignment. And alignment feels different. It feels steady, unimpressive, durable. You wake up without needing to negotiate your worth. You move through days without performing your identity. You simply are. Be honest with yourself. Earlier in your life, how much energy did you spend trying to be seen, understood, approved of? Acting as if you are the best gradually releases that energy. And when that energy returns to you, it doesn't turn into excitement. it turns into capacity. A final false belief dissolves here. You don't need to arrive somewhere to begin living well. The way you show up now is the destination. The future stops being a rescue plan and becomes a continuation. This is where people stop reading. Because the ending offers no fantasy, no escape, no promise that life will suddenly become easy. Hill's message is more demanding than that. Life becomes yours, fully, and ownership is heavier than hope. The emotional impact lands quietly when you realize that nothing external has changed dramatically, yet everything feels different. Not because the world shifted, but because you stopped asking it who you are. Acting as if you are the best doesn't make you better than others. It makes you less divided within yourself. You stop negotiating between who you are and who you pretend to be. That internal peace is not exciting. It's stabilizing. And stability changes how you move through everything. There is no finish line here. No final arrival, just maintenance, attention, renewal. You must keep choosing alignment, keep honoring standards, keep resisting the pull of comfort when it asks you to shrink again. And here's the last truth that refuses to soften. Once you know you can live this way, going back is no longer ignorance. It's a decision. So the question that remains, quietly watching you long after this ends, is not what you'll do next. It's this. Now that you've seen who you become when you stop asking permission, are you willing to live with yourself if you ever start asking for it again?